I'd like to spend a few minutes talking with you about lagging and leading data. And so I want to share my screen real quickly. Leading and trailing data. So there are different kinds of, as there are different kinds of assessments. For instance, we can talk about the frequency of assessments versus the purpose. Formative, benchmark, summative have different time frames in which they're actually implemented. The purpose is also varies, whether it's instructional, it's predictive, for instance, predicting how some student will do on another assessment, or it's evaluative. So there are different types of assessments, and we can categorize them by frequency and purpose. In the same manner, we can take a look at different kinds of data. So the data can be categorized into two typical types. One is that data that comes back so that it is done quickly. You get it back quickly, you can use it to make decisions or course alterations, things that happen in a very timely manner. Things that might affect what the instructional practices are in the classroom, or how the school goes about a particular activity. These data we call leading data or implementation data. Same things. We're implementing something, we want to get feedback on it very quickly. We're talking about leading data that leads to some other goal. The other type of data is data that is typically has a window, and there's over extensive period of time. And while it is excellent data, it's very important data, it's not something that we can use to make instructional day-to-day decisions. It is typically summative in nature. It is often used, in this case that we're talking about, is for accountability purposes, whether it's by the states, the federal government, etc. We call this kind of data trailing data or lagging data. So it is not something that is actionable in the short term. If we look at examples of this, from the state report card, we find forward results are trailing or lagging data. Access test scores, we don't get those back immediately, although they are pretty quick. Attendance metrics in the state report card lags by a year. So if we're finishing the 22-23 school year, the attendance data that's going to be on your school report card is from the 21-22 academic year. Graduation rates lag by a year or more. ACT results are lagging data. So these are all really important pieces of data, but they typically will not be available for immediate use and change of course, change of direction. Likewise, federal notification, the same kinds of things that we're looking at. So if you're a TSI or an ATSI identified school, we're looking at these things typically as being lagging or trailing data. Now, implementation or leading data, some examples might be what goes into my goals to affect the trailing data. So if I want to improve my forward English language arts scores, for instance, that's not something I can do in a big chunk and make it effective. And will I know what actually happens? And if I do this, does it make an impact? You won't know that for quite some time. Leading or implementation data examples are things that can be that help fine-tune programmatic implementation. That might fine-tune some examples of what we do as a staff or within the classroom. So this could be thought of more as formative data. Examples might be if you're looking at changes in attendance practices. The team, instead of waiting for 6 months to look at the data, the team looks at the data weekly or bi-weekly. And there's a plan for how to contact families with students with 2 or more absences. Then more data might be, were they contacted? What is the follow-up of that? Likewise, there might be an implementation plan of what are we going to do when a student hits 5% of absences, knowing that chronic absenteeism is greater than 10% of the school days. What happens when they hit 8%? What happens when they hit that 10%? Are we just giving up? What are we doing in each one of these steps, and how does that actually affect what happens? Likewise, new curriculum is put into place. Do we have professional development for the staff? What does that look like? What are the key pieces that they're learning about over time in that particular professional development? How do we know that that's actually being implemented in the classroom? Would be an example of a leading or implementation data example. So doing a classroom walkthrough. These are not surprise, I got you, but saying, hey, I'm going to be looking for these things that we learned about in our professional development. If they're not there, that would be information that needs to be used to fine-tune the process. So maybe something was missing. Maybe people need more practice with something. Maybe we need to have different supports in place. In either case, these are examples of things that are leading, things we can have actionable data points and examples of what might work in a school on a very quick turnaround. These we know have an impact on the trailing data or the lagging data that comes in, and that's the big picture data. So just these are some examples of the differences between a leading or implementation data and trailing or lagging data. If you have questions, please contact your associate superintendent, the R&I team, or the assessment and learning support team. Thank you very much.